We see customers who say, well, hey, 98% of our customers are now within a one-day shipping zone of our a DC, or a two-day shipping zone of a DC. But then when we look at how quickly customers actually get material, 40% of them are waiting because of issues like you talked about, that low local in-stock rate, low local fill rate. 40% of their orders, take 3 or more days to deliver. And they could have gotten every bit of benefit that they received from opening that new distribution center just by adding a little more inventory and improving their in-stock rates at the DCs they already had.
Hello everyone, my name is Drew Roth. This is Josh Bartel, our CEO at Hydrian Inventory Optimization. And today we wanted to discuss something that I've been seeing in the press a lot lately, which is the ambitious expansion of AutoZone in their supply chain. I wanted to hear more about what they're doing and what your thoughts are on that.
You bet, yeah. So AutoZone's big push has been to rapidly and dramatically expand the number of distribution centers, which they call super hubs, that are serving their retail stores. So their plan over the next 5 years, and they're well into this plan, is to build 200 of these mega hubs. Now, is that actually going to happen? That's hard to say. But they have built dozens of these locations. And the idea is that they want to store their inventory closer to their retail stores, closer to their end users. They want to take advantage of this closer proximity to get that delivery speed and availability, but they also want to give these small store locations access to kind of one level up the network, broader selection of stocked parts.
Sure. Like you said, that's a really ambitious goal. Obviously, that's something that's going to be really complex to navigate and manage. So you talked about what some of the reasons why they would be doing that. What challenges do you think they're going to face?
I think it's an interesting topic because this is relevant for any wholesaler, distributor that either already has or is considering moving to a multi-DC network or a multi-echelon network, where maybe they're thinking about having sort of a second layer in their supply chain. The benefits are kind of obvious. The downsides, there's a few obvious ones and there's a few not so obvious ones. Certainly the cost is an obvious one.
Right.
We're having to build a new or buy a new or rent space in a new distribution center, so that comes with hiring and staffing costs, that comes with building out infrastructure.
Sure.
And we're obviously having to invest in new inventory. Generally, to have 2 small piles of inventory to serve the same amount of demand, you're going to need slightly more total product.
Yeah.
So we're going to see inventory turns decline a little bit, all else being equal. But some of the not so obvious downsides or risks would include things like increased internal freight costs. So you can imagine now every time a customer places an order and the inventory, the item that they want, is not in stock at the location closest to them, but is in stock elsewhere, have an order routing decision to make.
Yep.
So we've seen with our clients, as you well know, they incur a lot of these costs due to shuttling material around the country.
Right.
They're out in one location, so they're restocking from their own DC. So these internal costs can really kind of get away from you. And sometimes they're very hard to separate from your total freight bill. So even if internal transfers are a relatively small amount of what you pay, say FedEx or UPS each month, it's all kind of rolled into the larger transportation expense, which, for a lot of companies, outbound expense is always going to be much larger. And thus, you might double your internal transportation expense, and it might be hard to separate that from the noise of everything else that's going on. Another problem that we're going to run into, or another challenge we're going to run into, is that as we have these smaller piles of inventory all around the country, the odds that any one location is out of stock go up. And what that can mean is, let's say that you sell on Amazon. Amazon often won't even display product if it isn't in stock in a location that can provide quick, 2-day or less delivery to a customer.
Yeah.
So even if you're somewhere in the network in stock, the customer sees on your website that you're in stock, sometimes these third parties, you're going to lose sales.
Yeah. So this is a situation where local in stocks really matter a lot.
That's right. And that's, I think, a really important focus to have is, as you build more distribution centers and you naturally are in stock more of the time for your demand, you have a higher fill rate across the whole network, don't lose focus of that facility level in-stock rate. So for the demand that you intended that facility to serve, its local customers, what percentage of their demand, what's your fill rate for those customers is really important to keep an eye on. And if you look to improve that, your global, your network-wide fill rate will naturally rise as well.
Yeah.
On the transportation side, I talked about internal transportation costs. Your outbound is going to increase significantly on orders where you do split the order between 2 locations. This is a really hard one to measure as well, because we see clients, they will get reports based on how far shipments are traveling. They'll zone count, or they might have there are lots of third parties that handle freight data that'll tell you, hey, you had a customer on the West Coast and you shipped from the East Coast, and so instead of being a Zone 3 shipment, that was a Zone 8 shipment, and so you spent $2 more than you had to, and that was your added freight expense. That type of reporting is typically a dramatic undercounting of cost.
Right.
And the reason is because to ship 2 packages, like let's say you're shipping 10 pounds, 10 pounds shipped in 2 packages is nearly twice the price of shipping 10 pounds in 1 package.
Yeah.
And so it's not just that added distance of the part of the shipment that had to go halfway across the country. It's the fact there's a second shipment.
Right.
You had to do a second fill, or second pack. The packaging overhead is typically nearly doubled. So a lot of these things don't scale.
Your customer has the worst experience too, right? They potentially receive 2 different packages at different times.
Yeah.
Maybe their order status says it's shipped and they only get half of the order and they don't know what's going on with the other one. So
Yeah.
I would imagine there's a lot of intricate problems that you would run into in trying to run this type of dispersed network as well.
That's a great point. And particularly if your customer is the type that is doing some kind of a project. We talked about AutoZone earlier. If someone's trying to, say, install, change their oil filter, and they don't have the crush ring that they need to form a good seal, well, they can't install the oil filter. So them getting the oil filter on day 1 doesn't do them any good.
Right.
The crush ring arrives 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So that comes up a lot, and it's a great point to raise.
So Josh, you already discussed, some of the pros and cons of approaching this type of supply chain. But if you had a client at Hydrian that said, hey, I'm interested in expanding my DC footprint, or potentially they already have an expanded network, but they feel like they're not managing it optimally, how would you go about prioritizing some of the actual actions to improve or help them facilitate the deployment of a broader supply chain?
Yeah, so this is definitely in Hydrian's wheelhouse. As you know, we help a lot of clients with these problems. I usually have a few pieces of advice to start us off if this is a conversation we're having with clients. So first piece of advice is generally expanding the geographic footprint is a good investment. Putting your product closer to customers pays dividends. They buy more when they can get it fast.
Right.
So it's a good avenue to pursue growth. I'd also say you don't have to go whole hog and buy a new facility and staff it right off the bat. You can utilize a 3PL to put some product close to a group of customers, some of your faster moving items, and just see how the market responds to having some faster delivery before you make that larger investment.
Yeah.
The next thing I would say is if you don't already have a very good handle on your outbound freight costs, your internal freight costs, your internal labor costs, then that's really important before you go down this path. Because as I said earlier, these can be difficult things to track. And so if you aren't really clear on, okay, today, for every $1 of revenue we get, we're paying X dollars in outbound for transportation. We have X number of orders that require 2 or more shipments to complete for the customer. Those are the kind of metrics you really want to keep a close eye on, because as you move forward with this, adding new facilities, some of those things can degrade. Some of that's expected. The benefits are usually worth it, but if you can't quantify them, then obviously you're not going to be in a good position.
Got it.
The last piece of advice I'd have for someone considering going in this path, I said it before, I'll say it again because it's so important, is focus on local fill rates. And what we mean by that is look at the customers that are low in a market for a location, whether it's a DC or store, wherever you're shipping from. Look at that location's customers and look at how the inventory in that location is serving them. Don't just focus on your network-wide, did we have it anywhere fill rate. Look at your, did we have it in the right spot fill rate? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is we want to ship the order the same day the customer placed it, all in one shipment, totally complete, and they get it, same or next day. And that kind of ideal outcome, those are the things we want to maximize, and that's what we should be focused on.
So, we've seen examples of clients where the global fill rate, the global in-stock rate is upper 90s, and you look at the local and it's 60%. So at that point, it begs the question, why have you expanded your DC network when you could accomplish roughly the same thing with many fewer facilities, right?
I think you're raising a great point, because you're absolutely right. We see customers who say, well, hey, 98% of our customers are now within a 1-day shipping zone of our a DC, or a 2-day shipping zone of a DC. But then when we look at how quickly customers actually get material, 40% of them are waiting because of issues like you talked about, that low local in-stock rate, low local fill rate. 40% of their orders, take 3 or more days to deliver. And they could have gotten every bit of benefit that they received from opening that new distribution center just by adding a little more inventory and improving their in-stock rates at the DCs they already had. So that's maybe another good piece of advice. I'm glad you raised it. Sometimes you don't have a geographic footprint problem. You have a local fill rate problem, a facility level inventory performance problem.
Yeah. So I found that very enlightening. I know I'm familiar with a lot of these concepts, but it's always great to hear you go through them again. I think it's really going to be interesting to follow what AutoZone does, what they actually execute on versus what they say they're going to do. Because as you and I both know, there's usually a big gap between those things. And managing a supply chain that's that complex is no small feat.
Yeah, well, AutoZone's stock is up about 20% year over year, so something's working right now at least.
Might be a time to buy.
All right.
Well, thanks for your insight, Josh. As always, it's much appreciated, and I very much look forward to having these conversations in the future. Make sure you all tune in if you found this insightful.